Well, hello, everybody. Just thank you for joining the webinar today. As you get settled in, a poll will pop up that will help us better understand your experiences regarding stigma. And so please take a moment to respond if you're comfortable doing so. The responses are, of course, anonymous and won't be attributed back to any individual poll participant. So if you could just take a moment, because this type of information really helps us as not only we grow in our own understanding and education around stigma regarding mental health and substance abuse disorder, but also making sure that we are serving caregivers in the best possible light. So, one of the things I wanted to mention today is that stigma, as all of you are aware, has a really profound impact on communities facing mental health and substance use disorder challenges. Whether it's disclosing a family history of addiction to a healthcare provider when requesting a non-opioid pain and medication, or opening up to a friend about the mental health toll of caregiving. Fear of stigma often prevents people from having meaningful and potentially life-changing conversations. So that's why I'm really excited to kick off today's discussion. Today, we're going to be talking about the ways that stigma continues to shape the individual's experiences impacted by mental health and substance use disorder. So as I mentioned earlier, my name is Marvell Adams Jr., and I serve as CEO of Caregiver Action Network. I'm proud to bring forward this critical discussion as part of our Families, Addictions, and Mental Health Network, also known as FAM, where we are focused on supporting individuals living with these conditions and the loved ones that walk alongside them. At FAM, we recognize that caregiving can be both rewarding and profoundly challenging at the same time, especially when caregivers are also battling shame, misunderstanding, or silence. Even as society makes progress in recognizing the importance of supporting individuals facing mental health and addiction challenges, stigma unfortunately remains a persistent barrier. So, as many of you are too aware, stigma doesn't begin and end with the patient or the care recipient. It impacts their family, their friends, their loved ones, and support networks too. In fact, one study we found said that over half of caregivers caring for a loved one experiencing mental illness reported some sort of perceived stigma about that loved one's mental illness. And in a survey shared in the lead up to this webinar, 54% of caregivers reported stigma impacted their ability to seek treatment of care. In other words, meaning that they were less likely hesitant to reach out for care or seek care because of the stigma surrounding the challenges of mental health. So we know it takes a toll. Nearly half of caregivers reported increased anxiety, depression, or other mental health disorders, rates 62% higher than non-caregivers. But even in addition to that, as we know that stigma plays a role in keeping families from seeking support. But today's conversation is really part of a movement to break that silence. We'll discuss about stigma, what it is, how it impacts individuals, and how to overcome those barriers. We'll examine its consequences from delayed diagnosis to self-doubt, and discuss ways to challenge it, whether by connecting with peers, advocating in clinical settings, or sharing your story to drive policy change. Throughout today's discussion, we'll hear from experts and advocates with insight and lived experiences, including the Honorable Mary Bono, former Congresswoman and CEO of Mothers for Awareness and Prevention of Drug Abuse, and Julie Lux, VP of Communications at Rural Minds. They help us understand how stigma interacts, or should I say stigma interjects. Oh my goodness, my words are not coming today. Do you ever have one of those moments where it's like, I know the word, but they'll help us understand how stigma intersects and impacts caregiving, mental health, and addiction, and how each of us can play a role in dismantling it. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our keynote speaker and panel moderator, Lauren Sisler, ESPN reporter, author of the book Shatterproof, which if you don't have it, you can't have my signed copy, but it is excellent. And I really highly recommend that you pick up a copy as soon as you can. And it talks about Lauren's story and also her role as a recovery advocate. So I'll ask Lauren to come onto screen and to join us, because I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And Lauren, as I know and many others already know, your story is really one not only that you're courageously sharing, but one that really has an impact in people understanding that you can come out of the shadows and tell your story and speak it very confidently and courageously. And just thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Marvell. I appreciate it. I loved our time together when I um, got to come visit you when we were doing the Science of Addiction event on Capitol Hill. What an awesome opportunity, and just a great opportunity to be here with all of you here today. Thank you all for getting in the chat, asking questions. These conversations are so important, and the work that Marvell and his team are doing is just incredible. And I think that the big thing that we're highlighting, underscoring here is stigma. How do we bring stigma out of the shadows into the light? Because that's where stigma wants us to live. That's where it thrives in isolation. And so we're going to have a conversation today. And as I share my story with you here in this first portion, before we get into this panel discussion, I want to meet you where you're at. As I share my story, I want you to think about some of the challenges you faced in your life, some of the circumstances that you faced, and really how those circumstances and those challenges have shaped you. And that's what I really want to lean into today as we address stigma and shame and how we can bring that into the light and help those around us, our community, our loved ones, our friends, our family, people that are surrounding us every single day, to make that connection and help people to feel loved and to know that stigma does not get the final say. And with that, let me introduce you to the Sisler family. I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, and this is my mom, my dad, and my older brother, Alan. And, we were a happy family, always on the go, giving it all we got in the sports world. We were considered a sports family. My brother, a 3-sport athlete, football, baseball, basketball. And little old me was the one that was always swinging around on the monkey bars. And essentially, my parents got sick and tired of taking me to the ER from all the battle wounds that I endured. And they said, we got to do something with this girl. And so at the early age of 3, they enrolled me in the sport of gymnastics. And so as you can see from these pictures here, woo, doggy, look at those pictures. Someone forgot to inform my mom, I guess back in the 80s, early 90s, like the choppy bangs, like taking a razor blade to my bangs, not sure it was the best idea, but apparently, and my ladies out there will appreciate it, apparently it was in style back then, okay? And so, a couple portrait photos here of my early gymnastics career as I grew up, and there you can see me with my braces, and in all my glory, the long, lanky Lauren. Well, the sport of gymnastics really took off very quickly for me, and so it was a sport that I fell in love with. And honestly, it was a sport that I became so invested in. And I knew that I wanted to take my talents to the next level. Well, here's the problem. I'm very tall. And as you can see, sitting on the stars there, at the time I was probably 5'2", 5'3", but y'all, that is cruising above the treetops in gymnastics world, okay? And so put it in perspective, Simone Biles, greatest of all time, 4'8". And I'm 5'9" now, y'all. So gymnastics, obviously, that growth spurt when it hit, things kind of took a turn. But I had invested so much into the sport of gymnastics, not only me, but also my parents. So I knew that I wanted to continue on that road. And so what did that look like? Well, Olympics not happening for this monstrosity. However, maybe a college scholarship was within reach. And so I started sending my recruiting tape all over the country. I remember those days where I was sitting there at the living room table with my mom, VHS tape in hand, addressing all these VHS tapes. Yes, my friends, VHS tapes. Break out the VCR. I know that I am dating myself here. But I would put my name and my phone number and my email address on there and just send it out. We sent upwards of 50 of these things out via snail mail. And, some different schools I was looking at, NC State, UNC, West Virginia Air Force Academy, and Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. And I'll be honest with you, Rutgers was never on my radar. Didn't know much about Rutgers. And this Virginia gal, I consider myself to be a country gal, went for an official visit to Rutgers. And I got to be honest with y'all, I was a little culture shocked. I was like, whoa. And of course, when I stepped foot on campus and I opened my mouth, everyone's like, oh, you're not from around here. And I'm like, well, what gave that away, y'all? Huh? Well, I guess the accent did, but it was also a place where I felt like I could spread my wings and fly. So I signed my letter of intent and I am off to Rutgers. The world awaits with wide open arms. And I am living it up, living the dream, going to football games, doing the work-life balance, the gymnastics, all the things. Life is good. Fast forward to my second semester, I pick up the phone and I called my parents like I always did. Not a day went by that I didn't talk to my parents on the phone. We were tight, we were super close, and it was important for me to always have conversations with them. So I talked to my mom this particular evening. Then she handed the phone off to my dad, who had just celebrated his 52nd birthday. And I remember being a little disappointed because it was the first time in my entire life that I hadn't been there to celebrate with him. And he said, "Look, Lauren, you're going to be home this summer. We're going to have all the time in the world to celebrate." And so, we talked for a few more minutes, shared a little bit more about life. And then I remember the last thing he said to me was, "Lauren, we love you so much. Keep working hard. We are so proud of you." And we said our I love yous and goodbye and hung up the phone, and that was it. And next thing you know, I drifted off to sleep after setting my alarm clock. And I wake up abruptly in the middle of the night to my phone ringing. I grab the phone on the receiver. I answer. I said, "Hello." My dad on the other end said, "Lauren, I need to talk to your brother." I said, "Well, what's wrong?" He said, "Lauren, I just need to talk to your brother." My brother at the time was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, parachute rigger in the Navy. He had just gotten off watch that night. So I figured something was going on with my brother. I found my brother's phone number, recited it back to my dad. My dad said, "I'll call you right back." No more than 30 seconds went by. My dad calls back. I answer. I said, "Hello." And there's a long pause. And my dad said, "Lauren, your mom died." And y'all, it came as a complete shock because I had just talked to my parents on the phone. It's the middle of the night. My mom's 45 years old. Like, "Dad, what happened?" He said, "Lauren, I can't explain it now. I need you to get on the next plane you can. I'll be at the airport to pick you up." And so I frantically get out of bed. I start packing my bags. I call the airline. I get put on hold for over 30 minutes, finally get through to them. My roommate had an emergency credit card. Y'all, I didn't have $50 in my bank account. So I am scrambling to try to make sense of this all and get on a plane so I can get home. All I wanted to do was run and jump in my dad's arms. All I wanted him to do was to tell me everything's going to be okay, because my dad always made everything okay. Plane touches down in Roanoke. I grab my bags. I go sprinting through the terminal. And as I run outside, I'm looking everywhere for my dad, everywhere, everywhere. Finally, as I'm standing there, my uncle Mike and my cousin Justin pull up. And in those moments, I'm confused because where's my dad, but also relieved because people that I know, familiar faces, we're going to get in the car, we're going to go see my dad. Everything's going to be okay. As we start driving, nobody says a word. Not a word is spoken. Finally, I worked up the courage and I said to my Uncle Mike, I said, "Uncle Mike, I just want to see my dad. Where's my dad?" And I can still feel it to this day as he pulls the car off to the side of the road, the gravel underneath the tires of that car. As he puts the car in park, he looks at my cousin in the passenger seat and then turns around and looks at me in the back seat of that car. And he says, "Lauren, I'm so sorry, but your dad's passed away too." And in that moment, I just felt this absolute heartache, this devastation, and really like my entire world came crashing down just like that. And now I'm having to figure out how I'm going to live this life without my parents, my two best friends, the two people that I'm not ashamed to say till the day that I left for college would tuck me in at night. We would say our prayers, and they would always encourage me through hard work, faith, and determination. "Lauren, you're going to go places." And now they're gone. The very next day, I'm in the funeral home next to my brother, trying to make sense of this all, being told now that I owe $7,400. Now I've got to come up with money to bury both of my parents. And so this now became my new reality, figuring out next steps in life, becoming an adult, really with not a lot of guidance. What do I do now? How do I do this? And I remember shortly after both of my parents passed away and we had their funeral, my auntie Linda, as we're pulling into the driveway of her house, my mom's sister, she looked at me and said, "All right, Lauren, time to go back to Rutgers." And I was like, "What? Go back to Rutgers? How am I going to go back to school?" And she said, "Lauren, you have a commitment to yourself, your university, your teammates. You got to go back." So I get on that plane. I go back to Rutgers. And y'all, it was an absolute roller coaster ride. I had never seen C's and D's in my life, never seen an F on a paper in my entire life. And here I am trying to stay above water, trying to survive this thing. And it was a tough journey. My very first summer back home after my parents had passed away, I'm standing in the living room with my brother once again as a moving truck comes up the driveway. And within a few short hours, everything in our house, everything, down to the last photo on the wall, was boxed up, taped shut, thrown on the back of a moving truck to be auctioned off to the estate to complete strangers. Y'all, there was nothing left. There was no will. The cars were repossessed. The house went into foreclosure. There was nothing. I go back to school for yet another semester, y'all, and I'm drowning in it all. Can't keep my head above water, and I'm about to fail out of school. But thankfully, my gymnastics coach stepped in, and she really kind of gave me that tough love. And she said, Lauren, we're here for you. We love you. But the bottom line is you've got to stand up and take the first step forward. Nobody else can do it for you. And that was really where my perspective shifted as I'm wallowing in this pity, this grief, and really this anger. Because y'all, not only was I grieving, I was angry. Why me? Why did this happen to my family? How did this happen to my family? So thankfully, I started putting the wheels in motion, shifted career paths, went into broadcasting, started seeing a counselor, someone to help me with the pain I was feeling. And thankfully, I was able to graduate on time with a degree in communications. And, I'll tell you, it just, it was a blessing to be able to get to that point. But it was still a struggle, y'all, because as I graduated from college, I enter into this world of sports broadcasting. I now become a professional storyteller. Okay. So my job is to now become a professional storyteller in which I tell people stories. I go in, I talk to the coaches, I talk to the athletes. I get to talk about the things that shaped these very people into who they are today. Yet for so long, people would share their story with me, but I was unwilling and unable to share my story. I was unable to share my story because of the grief, the pain, the anger, and the shame. Because for years, y'all, I carried so much shame because I could not come to terms with the fact of how my parents died. I would often tell this sugar-coated story over and over and over again because I was ashamed of how my parents died. So when people would ask, well, how did your parents pass away? I would say, well, mom died of respiratory failure, dad died of a heart attack. Why? Because it sounded so much better than my parents died of fentanyl overdoses. Y'all, I spent years running from reality, years hiding from the truth. My parents were going to a pain management doctor. They were seeking help for the pain they were experiencing. Mom had degenerative disc disease. Dad had chronic back pain, PTSD from his service in the military. The prescription drugs were working for a while until they weren't, until they became reliant on it, until they became addicted to it. It was the only thing that got them out of bed in the morning, helped them to survive, helped them to thrive. Yet underneath it all, they were fighting this battle alone in silence because of stigma, because of what society told them for so many years, what addiction looks like, who it impacts, who it affects. And my parents didn't want to be put in that box. They didn't want to wear that label. And so they suffered in silence. And therefore, it ultimately took their lives. My mom, 45, my dad, 52. And here I am living my life as a sports reporter, living my dream at this point. Yet underneath it all, shame was the very thing that I was wrestling with every single day. Shame, because the shame of how my parents died was taking me under. I could not confront the truth because of what society also told me about addiction, who it affects, who it impacts. Could not use the word addiction or overdose in the same sentence with both of my parents. Wasn't going to happen. But as I've been on this journey, this long, winding road, I've realized that as I mentioned at the beginning, shame and stigma live in the darkness. That's where it wants us to live, in isolation, away from people. But we have to bring it into the light. And that one person for me that really helped me bring it into the light was my Auntie Linda, my mom's sister, as she helped me to realize that my parents aren't defined by how they died, but by how they lived their lives. So this is now not just a journey of preserving a legacy because I did everything I could at all costs to preserve my parents' legacy. This is now about creating and building one of my own as well. And that is the journey that I have been on over the last decade. Helping people to recognize who they are, where they've come from. And sometimes the fight, the things that we feel in this life will break us, are really the things that ultimately build us. The things that don't define us, but refine us. And as I stepped into my story, started sharing the truth more openly, more vulnerably, suddenly those shackles of shame, y'all, broke free. I felt this freedom that I had never felt before because I was able to own my story, step into my story, step away from the fears, the fear of judgment. What are people going to think? And I think that is why we're here today, to have this conversation, to equip you and empower you. If you're someone that's struggled with addiction, have walked through addiction, or trying to find your way to recovery, this conversation is for you. For those of you who are taking care of someone, a loved one, walking alongside them in their journey to recovery, this conversation is you. Or if you are someone that has never experienced addiction in your life, I can assure you, you've experienced adversity, you've experienced hardship, you've experienced shame for the things that maybe didn't work out the way that you had hoped. This conversation is also for you. Because as we continue on this journey of life, it's easy to, again, hide from the truth, hide from the reality, and really put the things that we are most ashamed of in a box, in a corner. Put it on a shelf, don't acknowledge it, don't address it. But eventually it's going to catch up to you. And it caught up to me until I really realized that owning my story could really help someone else. As I'm sharing the story of these athletes and coaches, and I see this ripple effect that happens when we speak boldly and find our voice, how we can impact others, I realize it's time for me to step up to the plate and share my story too. And that's what I want to encourage all of you in this journey, whatever it is you're walking through, whatever challenges you faced. You have the resilience and the ability to pick up a million pieces that are shattered at your feet and build a life of resilience, a joy, and purpose once again, no matter how hard things get. And so as I close out my keynote, I want to share with you, if you pop up a picture of my sweet son, Mason. He's 2 years old now. He turned 2 on July 4th. And I'll tell you, this was a moment of reflection for me as I stood at my parents' gravesite, talking to them, spending time with them, being in that moment. And what I realized in that moment, my son Mason has all the flowers in his hands and he's picking them apart and he's throwing them on the ground. Like, he has no idea what's happening right now. But here's the thing. One day he's going to start asking questions. One day he's going to want to know who his grandparents were. One day he's going to want to know why they aren't here anymore. And me as his mom, his father, John, my husband, we are going to have the opportunity to share with him my parents' legacy. And, you know, it'd be easy to share the legacy of, oh, my parents, they were so loving, they were so caring, they were so compassionate, they were great people, because they were all those things. And they struggled. And they became addicted to their medication. And they lost their lives to addiction. It's so easy to hype up the highlight reel, put the highlights out there for everyone to see. But y'all, we got to get real with ourselves and with everyone else around us. And how do we do that? It's honoring the whole story, the whole picture, the good and the hard. And that is what I hope to give to my son Mason as a gift, that his grandparents were amazing people, but they also struggled. Because just like them, Mason, you too are going to struggle. Life is going to get hard. Life is going to challenge you. But through resilience, through courage, through faith, through hard work, through determination, you can overcome those things and become an amazing purpose, person, I should say. Marvell, you're rubbing off on me, buddy. You can be an amazing person that has purpose and can find that even in the hard and challenging times in our life. And what I hope to encourage him to do, as I hope to encourage you all, fall in love with your story. Fall in love with your story. Every chapter. It has become my life mantra. The good and the hard, because it is the very thing that becomes your legacy. Our stories are always being written. But if we can step into that and always find the courage to keep turning the page, no matter how hard it gets, fall in love with your story. That is my encouragement to you all. Because when you learn to fall in love with your story, shame doesn't get the final word. So I would love to just sit with that for a moment and say thank you for this opportunity to share my story with you, to encourage you along the way, to give you an opportunity to take this into the world when you go back home, when you walk through that front door tonight, whatever it is, to know that being present, being here matters, and the work that you do matters. And when you can share your story with other people wholeheartedly, you give people permission to do the same. And that is my encouragement to you today. And with that, let's jump on into our panel discussion. Alrighty. Let's pull this bad boy up. Are we ready to rock and roll, my friends? We've got an awesome panel discussion set up for you today. Some amazing individuals here. I was so excited about the curation of this group of people, with Mary Bono, with Julie Lux, Marvell. Of course, I met you, Marvell Adams, an amazing group of people. And so without doing introductions, I would love these individuals to introduce themselves because, wow, what an amazing group. You know, we've talked about how stigma shows up in our lives, our families. Now let's explore how it impacts communities and what we can do together to change that as organizations representing caregivers, moms, rural populations. Each of these individuals brings such a powerful perspective to this conversation. So let's get started with this, and we'll start. Julie, why don't you take it away? Tell us a little bit more about yourself and your organization.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Lauren. It's really a privilege to be here today because the one thing, unfortunately, that I can tell you is that stigma is still alive and well in rural communities. And Rural Minds is a nonprofit organization. In fact, the only nonprofit organization that is exclusively focused on improving and supporting the mental wellness for people living in rural communities. And I think our mission is to serve as the informed voice for mental health in rural America and to provide information and resources to people and to their caregivers who may be dealing with various forms of mental health. But also, and I think most importantly, the vision for Rural Minds is to see a rural America where there is no more suffering, silence, or stigma surrounding mental health challenges. And the impetus, I'd like to share a story with you all as well. It's not my story, but it is the story of the founder and chairman of Rural Minds, Jeff Winton. Jeff, who I have known and had the privilege of knowing the three main players in this story, both Jeff, his mother, and his nephew, Brooks, for many, many years. But the impetus for Rural Minds was when his nephew Brooks, who was 28 years old at the time, took his own life, leaving behind two 4-year-old twins and a devastated family. They live in a rural community in upstate New York, and it was 2 days after Brooks's brother's wedding. So the family was all gathered together to celebrate this wonderful family event and never knowing that it would turn into also dealing with a great tragedy. But um, again, stigma in rural communities, and we know that suicide and drug use can very frequently go hand in hand. We don't know specifically in Brooks's case, but when the time came to plan the funeral, Jeff's mother, Elaine Winton, they were sitting in the pastor's office, Jeff and his mother, and Jeff was going to provide the eulogy for Brooks. And as they had been getting ready for this meeting, a number of people, both family members and people in the community, had said to them, well, you're not going to tell people how Brooks died, are you? You're going to say it was a farming accident or he had a heart attack. And Mrs. Winton, with tears in her eyes, said to the pastor, no, it is time that we did talk about this publicly. We tell people why Brooks died, and we open the conversation that no one has had so far. So from the pulpit at the church during the funeral, Jeff told the story of how Brooks had died. And after the funeral, Jeff always describes it as people were literally lined up to share their stories, because the Winton family, the family who had been living in this community for 8 generations at that point in time, had the courage to step up and say, this is what happened in our family. And like 12 years later, 4 years ago now, which is hard to believe, Rural Minds was born. And it's amazing, I think, that the fact that this organization has grown so much in those 4 years, celebrating that anniversary this month, it's a testament to the need that's out there. And every time Jeff goes and speaks, every time I speak, every time Chuck Strand, our executive director, speaks, I don't think there's been a single time when someone hasn't come up afterward, or many times, many people, and said, I lost a brother, I lost a cousin to suicide. And so what we're doing is providing, again, those resources on ruralminds.org, which is the organization's website. We have a plethora of different types of information that is available to people, including information for caregivers who are dealing with people with drug addiction, with suicide ideation, and a variety of other mental health challenges. It is there, but I think one of my favorite and one of the best tools that is up there is a document that simply gives people some suggestions on how to start the conversations. Because one thing we hear so very often is, well, I have a friend and I think that maybe they're having some challenges, but I don't want to say anything because I don't want to make it worse. I don't want to cause a problem. So there are resources, there are ways to help empower people, because as we know, sometimes it's that one-on-one conversation. It's the person saying, I'm here for you, I care about you, I want to help you, and I'm not judging you. And I think that those conversations sometimes can be among the most powerful. So I encourage people to go to ruralminds.org. All of the information is absolutely free and available there. And again, Lauren, thanks for your courage and for all of the people now, because as you said so eloquently, those conversations are the only way that we're going to break down that stigma.
Thank you so much, Julie. I so appreciate the insight. Addressing the stigma is so important, the why, and not masking it. And I think that's such a beautiful way and story about Brooks that shares that so beautifully in such a tragic moment and such a tragic time. So thank you for sharing that. Let's pass the microphone over to Miss Mary Bono, co-founder and CEO of MAPA, Mothers for Awareness and Prevention of Drug Abuse. And what a resume, my friend. Mary, so great to have you here. And just give us an introduction and just let's lean into how stigma surrounds addiction and mental health care affected you earlier in your work in Congress, as well as your advocacy work at MAPA today.
Thanks, Lauren. Boy, it's really great to be here with you. And Marvell, I'm so pleased to continue to do work with you. It's powerful. And I think we're making a difference. You know, the show business adage, Lauren, you don't want to follow animals and children or Lauren. You don't want to follow Lauren, because wow, what a power hitter you are in this space. And so glad your voice is here. I just want to start on something. And Lauren, you did a great job of explaining stigma in your life and your story. But what's really hard to convey, I think, is how deep stigma cuts. And it really is a lifelong, it can be a PTSD sort of disease, if you will, in that it cuts so deeply. The pain people feel, the shame people feel, it can be superficial maybe for some, but for a lot of people, it cuts to the core. And I just want to make sure I get that across because I know, because I've lived it. I was the child of an alcoholic, again, a beautiful, wonderful, capable mother, but I grew up with that. And as you said, out of the shadows and into the light. Look, I'm at that age now when I say, when I was a child, things were different. And I hate it when I do that, but I'm going to do it right now. When I was a child, there was a television show on called The Munsters. In the chat room, you can text me, yes, you remember it, or God, wait, you're really old, Mary. Under the staircase in the Munsters, the House of the Munsters, which was a haunted house, there was a staircase that would lift up, and under that staircase was the pet dragon. And it's where they kept the pet dragon. So they could have this seemingly normal existence and hide the pet dragon. And that's how I have always viewed any substance use disorder, whether it was alcohol or drugs. So I've personally felt it, lived with it, grew up with it my whole life. I'm a walking lived experience person. And I was lucky when I ran for office, my campaign chairman was President Ford and co-chairman Betty Ford. And, I represented the Betty Ford Center. So it was a perfect little confluence politically that I had them as my mentors. And, it's hard to believe that all these years after Mrs. Ford came out and shared her story about her personal use and her personal abuse of alcohol and drugs, they were still fighting this fight. And, I got involved in this fight because I had a child who became addicted to prescription pills in high school. And what was hard was he had said, Mom, I thought I was doing the smart thing. I stepped over baggies of illicit drugs, and my friends found brown bottles of these safer drugs and safe drugs. And this was a burgeoning epidemic at the time. Nobody in Congress was confronting it. My colleague, Hal Rogers from Kentucky, was sort of the lone voice. So as you remember, Kentucky was hit hard early because Appalachia was so hard hit with the pill mills, the pills coming up from Florida. So Hal and I met and became kindred spirits because this was happening in my family. Here I'm a sitting member of Congress and it's happening in my family. Why isn't anybody doing anything about this? So eventually I sat on the committee that has jurisdiction over most of healthcare, and the healthcare subcommittee didn't care about this problem. So I chaired the committee called Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade, where I actually held hearings on the burgeoning prescription drug epidemic. We had mothers come forward, and those mothers and I are who formed Mothers for Awareness and Prevention of Drug Abuse. Mothers came and testified. And years later, one of my colleagues said to me, Mary, we just thought you were all hysterical mothers. Because as the epidemic was rolling out, it wasn't in every congressional district in a huge way, but it began to sort of take over the country like a tidal wave. And more members started to care. But it was a real fight in the beginning to get people to pay attention to that problem. So lastly, I'll just finish with this because I know you have a lot more questions, Lauren. I think the one biggest misunderstanding that I still get to this day, actually I have another point after this, I was wrong. The biggest misunderstanding I hear from parents when they find out their child is addicted, whether to prescription or illicit drugs, I'll just send them off for 30 days and they'll come back fixed. Mm. And it is the hardest thing to explain to parents. No, this is a lifelong journey. And you need tools, you need support, you need, truly to understand that this is a disease. And then I'll finish with this because Julie touched on it too. When I talk to parents now, I had a mother saying, she's a family member and she's sending her child off to college for her freshman year. And I said, well, have you talked to her about the problem with fentanyl-laced, fake pills? And her response was, I don't need to. My kid is a good kid. Mm. That wasn't, you can unpack that in so many ways. It was like, wake up, wake up, wake up. But I said, well, your good kid might be offered Adderall to stay up all night and study for a test. And you need to talk. You need to have this conversation. So MAPTA, Mothers for Awareness and Prevention of Drug Abuse, we have a campaign called The Greatest Gift is a Conversation. And it is to try to get around the brain barriers that people say, not me, not my family, not my problem. And to try to get people to hear lovingly, to have this conversation about the dangers of both prescription and illicit drugs. So that's my life's passion. And I just can't tell you how happy I am to be here with you guys and to see how many people are watching this too. So back to you, Lauren. Thanks.
Gosh, wow, Mary, that's so powerful because you're right. I think that in conversations and even where I take myself as a teenager into to college and then where I'm at now and now as a mom and one day I'm going to be having these conversations, right? And I think that is so prevalent is well, that's not going to happen to my child. That's not going to happen to me. That's not going to happen to my family. Good kid, nothing to worry about. But the majority of people that come out on the other side are saying, I wish I would have. And conversations aren't the fix necessarily, but it is certainly part of the toolkit that you're talking about. We've got to equip people with that. And so thank you so much for sharing that. Just your passion for this is just amazing. And so I love that. Wow, we've got a lot of great stuff here. So Marvell, let's let you jump in. Mr. Marvell Adams, and just, I love the smile on your face. I loved our time together when I was in DC, and I love the work that you're doing at the Caregiver Action Network, my man, the CEO, doing great work. So just give us a high level introduction of who you are, what you're all about, and then let's lean into the stigma around mental health and addiction and the impact and well-being of communities and how that might be affecting healthcare disparities as well.
Yeah. No, thank you so much, Lauren. And thanks to everyone, to Mary and to Julie for participating today, because this is such an important conversation. And at Caregiver Action Network, we really take a great responsibility for having those tough conversations, putting those tough conversations into the public realm, because without that courage, it really leaves caregivers and those that they love and support, out in the cold and not finding a place where they can find empathy and support. And so my role as Caregiver Action Network CEO really is a broad one in the sense of making sure that our strategies are really tied to exactly what caregivers are saying day in and day out through conversations like this webinar, through our Facebook support groups, and through our social media campaigns, and everything that we hear back from caregivers about what they're seeking support for. And mental health and addiction is a part of that as well. And so, we provide strategies and support out there through caregiveraction.org, whether it's caregivers looking to find support for themselves or their loved ones, looking for resources, and many times, just like in today's webinar, looking for empathy, to other caregivers that understand, because many times there is really a stigma that can be there and is there, but that stigma is really broken down when you have more and more individuals saying, yes, me too, I was a caregiver, my brother, my sister, my parents, my kids were impacted by challenges regarding mental health and addiction, and so being able to find, whether it's videos, articles, or training and more at caregiveraction.org is a really big part of what we want to make people aware of, because, raising awareness plus adding resources to that awareness is really what we're all about. But what I'll tell you, when it comes to that stigma, one of the things we started is the Families Addiction and Mental Health Network, and that can be information we found at fam-network.org, but that offers an even more robust selection of resources to support loved ones navigating mental health and addiction treatment. And it really allows folks to know they have a place that is really specifically designed for them as family members and caregivers that are supporting individuals going through those challenges. And so when it comes to this type of conversation, for me, I have to say it's about increasing awareness around things that are alternatives out there that really can leave individuals knowing, like, look, because you are navigating the challenges of addiction or mental health disorders, it doesn't mean that you are just alone, that there aren't treatments out there for you, because there are. And raising awareness, whether it's along long-acting injectables for substance use disorder or mental health treatment. We recently started an initiative called Take Control of Pain, which you can find more information out on our social channels as well as at fam.network.org. But, at the end of the day, this really is about providing information, whether it's discussion guides for families and caregivers to start a conversation with their healthcare provider, or just making sure that there really is information there. And, I'll say this last little part and hand it back over for the rest of our conversation, Lauren, but education is such a powerful tool. And that really is why our organization will continue to show back up on this topic, because in order for individuals to really navigate the challenges that we're talking about today and the stigma associated with it, education has to be accessible, it has to be factual, and it has to be rooted in the experiences of those that have gone through it, And I'll just say to you really quickly that I had an instance over the last couple of years to have not one, but 2 bouts of kidney stones, which I am told I would not have the comparative to it that it is akin to going through labor. It was one of the most painful things I'd ever experienced. And in those 2 hospitalizations, went out via ambulance both times because the pain was that bad, is that I was given a fair amount of opioids that didn't touch it. And I just thought that, okay, this is just kind of how it is. Or maybe it's just me. And then in my second time in the ER, a doctor gave me intravenous naproxen sodium, or Aleve, which is over the counter. Shocked the heck out of me. Like, it literally within 20 minutes, the pain was so minimal. I sat up and I looked at the doctor as coming back, and I said, "What did you give me?" And because I'm thinking it can't be she gave me, a non-opioid, and it was. She was, "Oh, it's IV Aleve," and I'm like, "That was very effective." She's like, "Oh yeah, it can be really effective." I'm thinking, education, right? Like, why is it that, like, after many, many hours of pain and suffering, that I was given the education that there are alternatives out there that I could ask for and seek out. And so, really our conversation today is allowing us to have the space to break down the stigma and understand that when that stigma is broken down, you really can receive education and insight that perhaps wasn't available before.
Marvell, that is so powerful. And I'll tell you, as you're telling this story about this medication and just the almost in a way the default of how you were treated right during this process of the pain that you were feeling, I ran into a much similar situation when I was giving birth to Mason. Look, I don't get a dinky button for not doing the epidural. I didn't do it all natural. I still went with the epidural, but I will tell you this, a dear friend of mine who's a nurse anesthetist said, "Hey, just know when you go into the hospital, they're most likely by default going to give you opioids through your IV, but you can request that they don't do that unless you request that yourself." I'm so glad I knew that, because number one, narcotics, opioids make me sick as a dog. Just sick as a dog. And so that was the first thing. And then I just wanted to be present and in the moment, and knowing that I likely would get sick and just just not be able to be there in that moment as I'm giving birth to my son. And I will tell you, we basically did a Motrin Tylenol back and forth, cycle. And it worked well for me. And I felt like, I had some other things going on, but essentially I felt like I was able to still kind of be there in the moment. And I'm just thankful that I didn't run into the situation of potentially having the opioids and then what that could have done to my body. And again, it's not one size fits all. And so we are not here to tell you, no, don't do that. But the key, like you said, Marvell, is to be able to go in educated, asking questions, feeling confident in asking those questions, and therefore then being able to take a little bit of ownership in the care that you're given in that process. And the more we know, the more that we're able to have these open-ended conversations and feel equipped to ask the doctor and the nurse and the caretakers, hey, what is the regimen here, and what are the alternatives? And then we can go from there. And I think that is where we stand in being able to really do a better job of helping individuals navigate healthcare and the provisions that are given throughout that. Hey, so I want to go back to you, Mary, as we talk about this. And Julie, I'm glad to see you're back on, so we'll definitely get you back in the mix here as well. Mary, from your perspective as a former lawmaker advocate, what are the main policy barriers that reinforce stigma or limit access to care for people with addiction and mental health needs? Let's dig into that just a little bit from that advocacy standpoint.
That's a great question, Lauren. First of all, the stigma still pervades everything, everywhere, whether it's people who are afraid, reluctant to go to their lawmakers and talk about their stories, share their pain, that still exists. But then lawmakers still have had this sweep it under the rug sort of approach. I remember, 15 years ago, handing over stories about a child who had died in somebody's congressional district and handing them the story. Look, this is happening in your district. And I remember they would just slide the stories away and do nothing about it. So, it's sort of that legacy of sweep it all under the rug that still exists. But look, there's some really good news here. It's not as bad as it used to be. And I will tell you this, when the Congress acts now, it's bipartisan on these issues. I'm happy to say on these issues, they're bipartisan. It's bicameral, meaning the House and the Senate agree. There's passion, enthusiasm, people get along. We've seen some progress here. I think, I remember seeing somebody who, this is an important thing too, not a childbirth or kidney stone story, but somebody who was in recovery, recently out of treatment for opioid addiction and needed a root canal. And of course, opioids were the drug of choice, and the panic on this young person's, mind, wow, I'm going to be right back on the hamster wheel here if I have to have opioids for this treatment, for this surgery, or whatever you'd call a root canal. Luckily, that doctor, like endodontist or whatever they are, y'all, I'm using your language, y'all, but had a great understanding and worked hard at an alternative treatment plan. And this was a long time ago, so there really weren't that many options. But look, the Congress, we have seen some work, and I think it's long overdue, but we have seen a couple of bills pass through that are unleashing some alternatives to opioids. Look, opioids are cheap, they're easy, people want them. Give me my Vicodin, I'll be all better. And so the pressure from people like you with your story and others on saying, I need an alternative. And Congress has reacted. And a few years ago, they passed one bill. Right now, there's a bill that's moving through Alternatives to Pain Act. Hopefully the congressional calendar has room to get this thing done. Again, bipartisan, enthusiastic support. And, we can come so far if we can just unleash this innovation. Oh, and by the way, allow access to these drugs and have them covered by insurance or Medicare or whomever, so people will choose them over opioids. So the stigma's there, it's hard, and I'll say with any advocacy, it's important to remember the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And when you're not in front of your lawmaker or making your case about what is important to you, somebody else is. And, it might be an opioids conversation today, and then the next conversation your congressman or woman is going to have is about, satellite launches, and they're going to move on to the next issue, whatever it might be. So bring it up often, bring it up kindly, and keep doing it. And again, let's ask for alternatives, to pain. Let's get these options out there for people to request and to choose. I think it's the next horizon, and I think it's where we got to go.
I love that, Mary. I think you said it, the squeaky wheel sometimes, and it does get lost in the abyss, right? We've got so many issues, things that we're focusing on, but I love that. And I think that the more that we speak up as groups, right, we're all in this together, that we could continue to move the needle and really create opportunities for change and, eradicate this stigma. As you said, it's always going to be there, but we can still do our part and keep pushing and keep pushing and, not ignore the quote unquote elephant in the room. So I love that so much.
Amen.
Hey,
Yeah.
I want to talk with Julie specifically. We talk about rural communities. I grew up in rural Virginia. So I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, but then actually moved out to the country when I was in high school. And so rural community, I was exposed, to some things. It's definitely a place where, everybody knows everybody's business, right? And I remember the deputy that I ended up meeting, Eric Thwaites, recently, actually, after having written my book, Shatterproof, in that process, he was the one that actually responded to the call that day that my parents passed away. And it's just been an amazing relationship. But the one thing he said to me that has just been so profound, he said, Giles County is not the sleepy town that most people think it is. And it just kind of set with me. And I'm like, I want to unpack that with you, Julie, because, I think rural communities, there's this landscape and there's different challenges in every community that we face. But from you, I want to know, what can we do to foster safe, inclusive environments for families and caregivers navigating the mental health and addiction landscape in America's rural communities, and the work you're doing?
Well, and I think it's a double-edged sword in some ways, Lauren, because there is that stigma that, and I think I agree with you all that it is reducing, thank heaven, and the education that Marvell's talking about and that we're all about is certainly adding to that diminishing of stigma, I hope. But when it comes to rural communities, on one hand, the people in rural areas are the first ones to come to the help of their neighbors. So we have to, and then they're also the ones that maybe are the ones saying, oh my gosh, did you see so-and-so's truck in front of the mental health clinic, assuming there is a mental health clinic in that community, because access, of course, in rural communities is also a big challenge. But trying to leash that natural desire to help, to be a support, and empowering people. If I'm answering your question, empowering the people in those rural communities to have those conversations, the tools that we have, the tools that Marvell and your good organization have, that people will begin to understand that they can be that one conversation, just talking about the fact that you're not alone. And maybe in some areas that's going to be a shorter trip if people are a little bit more. And again, I think law enforcement probably are seeing it on the front lines. So they're certainly understanding more about this, but they can be part of the solution too. The first responders can be part of the solution as well, knowing that and having that, as we say, sympathetic ear. So non-judgmental, sympathetic ear when someone is in crisis or when you think they're in crisis, to provide that first step, because it's just a first step, maybe empowering them to go and find the help that they need as well.
Yes, empowerment is key here, and I think that is what I'm hearing from each and every one of you. And the road, leads to this opportunity to really break down the walls of stigma and what we're facing in this battle that we've been walking through for a very long time, and we will continue to fight, my friends. All right, Marvell, I do want to ask you, as we talk about the work that you do, can you share with us a few strategies for families, caregivers to consider when supporting a loved one that's navigating mental health or addiction treatment? And how do you encourage those caregivers to care for themselves while also caring for someone else that's in recovery?
Yeah, a couple things I'll mention just briefly, Lauren, is that one, ensuring that you are able to find resources when you need them, because unfortunately, caregiving, many times you are in a crisis mode, from crisis mode to crisis mode, and that feeling of survival really makes it hard to reach out for information. And so, one strategy we always say is being able to educate yourself about what is out there and what information can really help you in your journey. And so, we've created fact sheets that can help people understand how to understand care coordination, as well as understanding caregiver coordination, navigation, should I say, being able to navigate this intricate world of caregiving and knowing where to find resources. And so whether you go to fam-network.org or caregiveraction.org, you can find information that can really support not only your journey in supporting your loved one, but also for the individual that's going going through those struggles as well. But lastly, what I'll say from a strategy standpoint, understanding that, like they say, when before you take off in an airplane, you have to put on your mask before you help the person beside you. And that is so consistently something that is something in the back of my mind when I talk to caregivers and individuals in care circles, because if you allow yourself to burn out, if you allow yourself to put everything, you have into your caregiving journey, and you don't have ways to fill your cup, you won't be able to be there sustainably for your loved one, and you will never be able to be there for yourself, which is so necessary because your own humanity cannot be lost in any journey that you have as a caregiver. And so for those strategies, making sure that you take space for yourself, even if it's 2 minutes in the driveway before you go in the house, or taking a minute to stop and get a coffee and actually sit and drink it at Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts before you jump back in the car, wherever you can find it. But understanding that the resources and information out there are available and you are not alone.
Love that so much, Marvell. Thank you. And I know we're at the top of the hour, so I do want to wrap this up. I just want to get one last quick statement from you, Julie and Mary, just something tactical people can take away from them, whether it's a piece of a conversation, how you can equip and empower people to have the conversation. Because a lot of times we live in this fear of like, how do I take that next step and really lead people in the direction of finding resources, looking for help, and looking for resources like Marvell and his great network provide for people. What's one little tip or tactical tool that we can use to really break down and continue to break down that stigma and have this conversation and really make a difference in people's lives? Mary, I'll start with you.
All right. We're deferring to each other there out of politeness. Yeah, I think for me, again, a lot of this here is my personal experience, my personal beliefs, maybe anecdotal, but seeking out somebody who understands and who knows to be your partner and to walk with you. And I want to add something to Marvell's, great list of things to do and to take care of yourself. I'm a big believer in prayer and the power of prayer. And that's gotten me through a lot of tough times. So I would say seek out people, seek out peers. If, seek out a mentor, seek out a sponsor. And I will say this, I say it all the time to people who don't understand it. I think substance use disorders, stigma, are one of the few diseases that can be cured, can be helped by the power of community and understanding. You can't say that about cancer, diabetes, asthma, you name it. But in this case, it goes a long way, can be very helpful. And it's important for people to remember that a substance use disorder, it's the only disease that I know of that the brain will fight you to keep you sick. And people need to understand it, that people who are in the throes of it need their substance just like we need air to breathe. And to understand that and to approach it from a place of love, get that peer support, and then don't back down when you hear about things like great bills that can go through the Congress that might make a difference in people's lives. We need support. We need people saying, yes, let's do this. Let's get this, this legislation over. And I think you can find that on Marvell's website too.
I love that.
You guys.
I hear Tom Petty in my head. Won't back down,
Won't back
baby.
down.
Won't back down. Let's go.
All together now.
I love it. Julie, we'll let you have the final word here. A little bit of a little tip or tool, and then we'll hand it over to Marvell to close us out.
Sounds good. Thank you, Lauren. For mental health in general, if we could give one message to the people, whether it is somebody who is suffering currently in silence or someone who is fearful or has a loved one that they feel is suffering, remember, you are not alone. And there's someone else out there that is dealing with the same thing that you are, and there is support available. Whether, there's so many different kinds of support. You can go to the 988 hotline if you want to be very anonymous, or you can reach out to your community, your clergy, someone in your community. So remember, if you are suffering or if you love someone who you feel is suffering, just know that you are not alone and there is help available.
Love it. Thank you so much, Julie Lux, Mary Bono. You guys are wonderful. Thank you for being part of this. And Marvell Adams, thank you so much for just leading the charge here. The great work that you do, the resources in the chat function there. You can see some of the resources that we've dropped in, some things that you can lean into as people of the community. If you're a caregiver, you're walking alongside someone, and this can apply to everyone. So please take a look at that, really lean in. There's so many great resources on the CAN website as well. So would love to direct your attention there when you get a moment, when all things wrap up. And again, thank you everyone for sharing your insights, the incredible work you're doing. It means a lot to me. It touches my heart just to see, because we do not do this alone. In the sports world, you never win a championship alone, y'all. To succeed and to hoist that championship trophy, we've got to do this together. And that's why we're here. And I'm so grateful. And with that, thank you for your heart and your compassion for this work. And Marvell, I'll hand it over to you to close us out and say goodbye.
All right. Thank you so much, Lauren. And thank you to Mary and to Julie as well. And for everybody on today's webinar. And Lauren, I have to tell you, I think you have a promising career ahead of you in broadcasting, just from looking at your ability on screen, like present. So just food for thought, but just thanks to our audience for joining us and for engaging today's discussion. And just this last minute, if you could just hang in there, and we have an additional poll that we want to pop up about what resources you would find useful in navigating confronting stigma, because Caregiver Action Network, the FAM network, and all the organizations we've talked about today, it's really about how can we meet caregivers where they are and provide information that's going to be impactful in that moment and through their ongoing caregiving journey. And so feedback for this is really helpful. And just making sure that you make space for yourselves and understand this topic not only reflects the challenges that so many families are going through, but it also recognizes the hope and strength that's defining our caregiving communities. And that really, the word communities, is absolutely core to how we continue to fight the good fight and really help ourselves and individuals around us that are navigating mental illness and substance use disorder. For more information, as I mentioned before, feel free to reach out for more information through the Families Addiction and Mental Health Network, or fam-network.org. And really, the pathway to ending stigma is ongoing, and I encourage you to take whatever you've learned today and carry it forward. And one last little plug I'll give is that, latest statistics show that 55% of caregivers out there are women. And so men, you still have a ways to go, stand up, man up, and get out there, because you have a role and a voice in this conversation as well, because caregiving is not women's work. It is something that is really about supporting and being there as an entire family and chosen family. And so we really hope to see you again soon. Everything that we've talked about today in this video will be uploaded onto our Caregiver Action Network website soon. So please take a look out for that. And just thank you so much for today's time. And we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Yeah. Take care, y'all.